Hey guys, welcome back to the Japan Archives, episode 47 now. We're just gonna call this episode Sushi for this week. I'm your host, Thomas.
I'm your co-host, Heather, who's going to move the microphone closer to her face.
What a great start, as usual, for us.
I know.
We're a small podcast, a little duo that every week delves into the myths, the legends, and some of the folklore, but also the real-life history surrounding all the points in Japan, both past and present. How are you doing this week, Heather? Obviously, this is your episode, so
I know. I was like,
take the wheel if you wish.
Was I going to intro, or were you going to intro? And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm confused.
Probably were. I'm sorry. I seem to have taken over, but I'm handing over to you now.
I'm more than happy.
Is that okay?
I'm more than happy for you to take over because I'm so excited to be back recording and everything.
Yeah, recording's been a bit of a mess right now. But you're doing okay this week?
Yeah, we had sunshine, which was nice because it rained and rained and rained and rained. And thank goodness the flooding has really stopped, although it is possible it might happen again in like the Kyushu area possibly. But yeah, a few things here and there, but nothing to report. How about you?
Well, I'll get into that when I get into my section for today, as I have a Japanese proverb, which, well, I've talked to you what the theme is, so it definitely relates to how my last few weeks have been, for sure. Until we get to that, please distract me. I'm very excited for another introduction into culinary history, especially sushi, with it being, well, quintessential Japanese, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I think most people, when they think of Japan, think of sushi. It's one of the very first things that seems to come to mind. And interestingly enough, we're doing sushi after we did the momiji meat. So we're carrying on with a protein theme, I guess, for these past couple of weeks. Well, we've done rice. So we've done curry. Now, meat and sushi. Well, Thomas, what do you think about when you think about sushi? Just the first thing that pops in your head.
For me, the first thing for sushi would always be going to the Sushiro restaurant chain. It's a conveyor belt sushi restaurant I used to go to with you, used to go with Tessa, but we haven't been in ever so long due to Corona. The fact that sushi can be, I'm going to say this now and you're going to be like, you're horribly wrong. You call yourself someone who lives in Japan. I was going to say sushi isn't necessarily always something with fish. Like, you can have the ones where it's just the rice and the cucumber, or the rice and the omelet type of thing on top. Is that correct, or is that technically not sushi? Are you going to get into that? Have I ruined it already? Have I spoiled the surprise?
On the contrary, my dear sir, you've just made me super incredibly happy, because I'm going to go ahead and start out with this first of all. So yeah, you are right. And I completely 100% agree with you, because the sushi that we eat today is a more modern invention. A lot of the sushi we eat today. And there are different types of sushi, like you mentioned. You have the avocado, cucumber. There's the California rolls that are mayonnaise and like sometimes fried fish or fried shrimp that are put into rolls. And even when you go to Sushiro, there's the omelet on sushi, or hamburger on sushi, or there was a karage with the fried chicken on sushi, which is interesting.
I'm wondering, is there a line where the definition of sushi ends, or does it seem that the term has definitely become broader over time?
Nope, that's a great question. And Thomas, towards the end, I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on what I just said. But first of all, I do want to say that there is absolutely no sushi judgment here. This podcast, you do your sushi as you like to do your sushi. There is only sushi love in this podcast, all kinds of sushi. So I'm going to start there and then come back to your question at the end, because I do have something about that. But let's go back in time to talk a little bit about the origins of sushi. Yes, please do the hand wave if you need to.
Cue movie-themed flashback sounds.
I have some, but I think they're copyrighted because they were on a TV show, so I can't say anything that I want to. Now, I have pulled from a lot of sources on this, and I've included a lot of my sources. And there's also some books that are on my list to buy that I haven't bought them yet, but they're on there. Also, food origin history can sometimes be debated, sometimes highly debated and controversial. And updates can be changed based on new findings. So all the information I'm sharing with you, take it with a grain of salt, or maybe a bit of vinegar. Now, sushi could be said to have origins dating back to the BC times. Perhaps it started around Southeast Asia. People in this region would preserve fish by pickling in a mixture of salt and rice for a long time, several months, and I think I read somewhere maybe even like a year. With this process, only the fish was eaten, and the rice was tossed out, having served its purpose as a pickling agent.
So I suppose the rice would have not been, well, satisfying or probably edible by that point?
Yeah, it was essentially kind of like goo, rice goo.
That was not an image I needed. I wish I had not asked.
You're welcome. It'll get better, I promise. Okay, so, all right, I mentioned pickling. I'm going to stop and we're going to talk about pickling, which I think is super fascinating. And I've done a little pickling myself, and I really want to do more. And someday I will make kimchi and umeboshi, but that's not yet. So, Thomas, what do you know about pickling?
The only thing I could safely say I know about pickling is that it is a way in which you can preserve food for longer.
And that's actually almost exactly what I put in my notes. There is some extra. Pickling causes good bacteria to form, which munches away at the food, causing the fermentation. The fermentation, so the little bacteria that's eating away at the food, is producing different cultures such as lactobacillus and some other ones that, if you want to know, I would suggest looking that up, because other people more knowledgeable than me have way more information about fermentation, and it's fascinating. I recommend looking it up. But these bacteria are great for your stomach. It keeps your internal parts moving along. And also, some vitamins from vegetables and fish are preserved, which is important, and we'll come back to that later. All right, so now back to sushi. We've got the pickling, but sushi perhaps made its way to Japan around the 700s, as the first mention of it seems to be in a textbook called the Yoro Code. And sushi was used as a form of tax payment.
Interesting. I would have always assumed, based on a agricultural system, that merely rice would have been used as a taxable income.
Well, you have rice and you also have different foodstuffs. So, some prefectures, I do know that rice wasn't as big of a crop, more like wheat. There was a lot of more wheat production, and like mugi. Mugi is like a general term for different kinds of wheat. So, depending, I guess, on your region and what you had available, because I would think probably depending on, I guess, your location, how much rice you might yield. So might need to supplement that. Plus, rice was also for currency too. So whatever would pay your taxes. Now, the sushi eaten around this time was the nare-zushi and kusare-zushi. And also the 12th century. So we have a little bit of gap in when sushi was mentioned, because we have the preserved fish, but then also in the konjaku monogatari-shu, and this was around the time of the shogunate, vinegar was added to the sushi. The vinegar enhanced the fish's flavor and allowed for a shorter preservation time, which meant that the rice could also be eaten. The rice had previously been thrown out, which was mottainai, or wasteful. Oh, and cooking methods were changing around this time. And because the rice could be preserved, more rice could be eaten. So the rice also becomes a food, not just the fish. Rice and sushi was, eaten this way for a while, but we're going to get to the Edo period, and let's get introduced to hayazushi. This technique used vinegar to shorten the fermentation time, and this sushi was pressed using heavy weights, and then the sushi was sliced up with the fish and the rice. Also, these pieces were much bigger than we're used to seeing today, closer to kind of like the size of your palm.
Oh,
Yeah, it's bigger. And I think when we went to the Edo Museum in Tokyo, which was so long ago, do you recall seeing the cart, the kiosk for the sushi?
I do remember the cart, yes.
Do you remember seeing how big that sushi was? It was much larger
Mm.
than we're used to seeing now. Now, you've probably seen this style of sushi, especially it's like saba or mackerel. It says sushiro, I know, because sometimes the professor gets it. Also, it's at the grocery stores, but it's just like pressed fish on top of on top of rice. It's still eaten today. It's not as popular as the other forms, but it's still eaten at a pretty good clip. And during Edo, nigiri sushi was born, and you've probably heard of nigiri sushi or nigiri. This method actually came from Yohei Hanaya and consisted of fish, and the fish was preserved with vinegar or the fish was cooked. And then the rice was vinegared separately. And then that fish was placed on top of the vinegared rice. So the nigiri
Mm.
sushi
Okay.
is probably when you picture sushi, you probably picture a piece of fish on top of rice. I think when I picture sushi, I usually think of nigiri sushi. And that's what most people kind of draw. At least I know my kids in school when they would draw draw sushi, that was the picture they usually drew. It was like the salmon or the tuna, usually tuna. Tuna was really popular with the kids. Tuna on top of rice.
I had a quick question. You mentioned cooking the fish. I always assumed it was sushi if it was raw fish, so it can still count as sushi if it's cooked?
So during the Edo period and prior to that, it was preserved, and then that nigiri sushi is when the fish was could have been cooked instead. It was not eaten raw.
Okay.
Now there may have been some instances that was possibly eaten raw, but the majority of the sushi, especially if you're a sushi vendor, which during the Edo period, sushi was served on little kiosks are like little wooden carts. They look kind of like sort of like a gate, I guess is the best way you could describe it. And it has a piece of wood that you would put your shoulders underneath and you could walk it to wherever. So if you weren't doing a really good business in one spot, put it on your shoulders and just make your way over to the next spot. So you had to have something that would not make your customers sick because, during the Edo period, there was no refrigeration, especially in Tokyo in the summer. I don't think I would eat raw fish from Tokyo in the summer.
So the idea of sushi being a raw variety is a very modern concept then. I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I here?
I
But
love
carry
it.
on, sorry.
I love it so much. You're doing lovely transitions, just beautiful transitions. It's like I couldn't have asked you better. So you just thank you. So yeah, and the professor called these kiosks. So that I would have say like wooden cart or wooden stand, but that's what he called them. And you can kind of think of these kiosks as the original fast food. Also, I think soba, like you said, standing soba, and like, I think onigiri and something else was also on the carts, but I can't recall. Oh, I mentioned about the vitamins earlier. We're going to come back to the vitamins because pickling, in particular vegetables, preserved a lot of the vitamins needed to prevent beriberi, which was nicknamed Edo disease. So
Oh.
during this time, if you got beriberi, you had Edo disease because it seemed like a lot of people in Edo or, modern day Tokyo seemed to suffer from it. I didn't see a reason why, but if I had to guess, if you lived in a city, your access to fresh fruit and vegetables might have been more difficult. So, these pickled vegetables were almost like medicine to help you keep well, not just for food, but also
Mm.
for medical purposes. I don't know, Thomas, have you today, we've been out in a few places in Japan. Have you seen any sushi carts or sushi kiosks or even like little standalone tables for sushi?
Don't believe I have.
Yeah, so like most of Japan doesn't have a street food culture. There are certain cities that do have street food available, or sometimes on the way to temples, you'll have some stalls set up. But around here, it's restaurants. There are a lot of restaurants. Although I have seen some food trucks that have kind of started popping up in Japan, and that's really cool, especially in Tokyo near in Little Plaza, there's tons of food trucks. So food truck culture has come to Japan and it's starting to get more popular. How did sushi get to restaurants?
People got bored of carrying their shops around with them?
I like that explanation way better than the one I have, which is during the 1920s, there was a great earthquake in Tokyo that leveled
Oh, yes.
a lot of the city. So many places were destroyed. Remember that the cherry trees were, I think, in some places preserved or had to be, replanted. Since there were so many buildings leveled, this required essentially a restoration of the city. Land prices were cheap to encourage rebuilding, so sushi kiosk owners decided to open restaurants, and thus the sushiya was born.
So it was very quick that after that, this whole, I won't call it food truck culture because well, I guess it kind of was. So after this earthquake, this whole mobile sushi restaurant business model basically went extinct.
I think now see, you're actually touching into some history that I have previously heard from the professor that requires further research, and that is we don't see a lot of like street food because like laws had been passed during, I think, was it close to the Tokyo Olympics or around the time? Maybe it seems my history is fuzzy and I have to look it up. So don't quote me on this. There isn't a street food culture because it was kind of discouraged by the government, where they basically said you can't have street food. But I have to look that up for sure. So another podcast. We'll see if I'm right or not. Now you mentioned fish and raw fish. So you gave me a nice little transition because I wanted to talk about the fish. What kinds of fish were used? Well, I know mackerel was used and preserved for a while. So fish that had like maybe like a few parasites or like basically none. So fish that could be safer to eat. Fish like salmon were not used because they had a lot of parasites, and that was some
It's a
information.
big thing now, salmon for sushi restaurants, I feel.
Yeah, because I was going to say there's salmon as far as the eye can see, and you go to Sushido, there is like what three or four pages of salmon that you can pick from.
Salmon is normally my go-to.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's my number one. Well, yes, you mentioned the raw fish because we eat salmon now, but they really didn't eat salmon, raw on sushi. Thomas, I'm gonna challenge you again.
Okay.
What do you think happened in the 20th century that allowed us to perhaps eat raw fish?
I'm assuming we're talking in the realms of modern inventions.
Yes.
Well, looking at my lovely cold glass of milk, I'm gonna go with the fridge.
Bing bong! You were right. I like how you had the milk. That was just perfect timing. That wasn't planned.
Obsessed with milk. It's ridiculous.
Build strong bones. Anyway, modern refrigeration gave us a technique of deep freezing to kill the parasites in the fish.
So you're still eating the parasite, it's dead.
So it's the parasite has been killed, whether or not the leftover of the parasite is there, or if it's something visible to the eye. I did not go into that depth of research, which actually might be interesting, and also brings up a really interesting story as a side note. Did you hear about the lady in Tokyo who ate some sushi and then later was found to have anyone who's squeamish just close your ears for the next 10 or 20 seconds. Just trust me on this. If you're squeamish about this kind of stuff, close your ears. This is your public service announcement. She had a worm in her throat from a parasite from sushi that she ate.
Oh, so it embedded itself in her throat
Yes,
and she had to have it
removed.
yanked out.
So some parasites can happen, but Thomas, don't freak out, because if you think about
It's gonna be a super rare thing.
yes, how much sushi is consumed in Japan alone, and let alone around the world, because sushi is around the world now. The percentage of chance that you're going to get a parasite, especially like that deep frozen method, is super low. But I do want to put out a little food safety guidelines. If you are immunocompromised, pregnant, a child, on the older side, you might want to check with a doctor to make sure if you can eat raw fish, or just check anyway, because I don't want to be responsible for anyone to get sick or a parasite. So if you're concerned, check with a doctor. But according to at least percentages, you're probably fine. I mean, we eat sushi at least every couple weeks, if not sometimes every once a week. So yeah, if you're eating sushi, if you're eating your fish raw, more than likely, I would say it's probably like in the 90s some percent chance your fish has been deep frozen. Now, it's still fresh. It is still a fresh fish. It has not been sitting there for like, so I believe, presumably not months on end. So it doesn't have like freezer burn, but it has been deep frozen for your protection to kill off the parasites. So we are firmly in the 20th century. And let's take a little trip around the world. How did sushi get around to various places? Well, I'm just going to focus on. I'm sorry, guys. The U.S. and the U.K. because U.S. and U.K. I'm going to keep it simple because I also think this would be fascinating to research for other countries too. But I'm going to try to keep it a shorter podcast. Sushi came to the U.S. in the earlyish, maybe like 20th century, or even a little bit before, and it came with Japanese immigrants, and that was during the Meiji period, like the Meiji Restoration. But it's not really until the 1960s that sushi gained popularity, and more sushi restaurants were built in several cities because at that point, more of the sushi restaurants had been like in California, which is where the Japanese immigrants started before they moved to different places in the country. There is definitely a sushi culture in California. I have eaten sushi in California and it was fantastic. It was so good.
And California is where the California rolls were invented. Yes, it's purely a foreign evolution of sushi.
It is indeed. And I have a little bit of a side note about that came from the professor, but we'll come back to that
Mm,
later. How about the UK, Thomas? Do you know how sushi got to the United Kingdom?
no, I actually don't.
It came in the 1950s to the UK, and a prince of Japan visited with Queen Elizabeth II and ate sushi.
He met with Queenie.
He
Oh,
did. He met with the Queen. And so she had sushi. So you can probably thank that visit for sushi coming to the UK. Did you eat sushi when you were in England?
when I was at college, if I ever went out shopping with my really old friend from England she's called Paige, we would always go to, I don't know if it's a worldwide chain, but it was definitely like a main sushi chain in England was called Yo Sushi, and it was very similar. Like it was the conveyor belt sushi, like the different
Oh,
dishes were different colors. Different colors meant different prices. Way more expensive in England than it is in Japan, but they were really good.
this is a transition. I'm going to do my own transition that I didn't even think about. But was there any specific sushi that was kind of a UK English special? So something we have California roll in America and different types of sushi. But was there any kind of sushi that may have been specifically that you saw?
Like Bubble and Squeak sushi, Toad in the Hole sushi. No, I don't ever recall there being like a Britishized sushi, if I'm honest.
Now I feel like I kind of want to try that.
I mean, it sounds horrific. I do not want someone to, please do not invent this and send it to my house. I'm sorry. Do not do that.
So, types of sushi. Let's talk a little bit about that. Now, in my notes, I didn't put specific types of sushi because I put a link to types of sushi and more than likely, actually a couple of links, I think. More than likely, if you eat sushi or you're familiar with sushi, you probably know some sushi. So, we mentioned California rolls and we mentioned salmon. Well, Thomas, what kind of sushi can you think of? Like you can think of a specific sushi, specific sushi name, a fish or ingredient. What comes to mind, or what's something you might get when you go out to eat?
So if I'm not having the salmon, tuna, you can get a lot of tuna ones, which I've never been a fan of, if I'm honest. Every time I try the tuna, I'm like, "Eh." Squid? I've seen squid.
Do you get squid?
I've seen squid. I've never tried it though.
Okay.
A lot of different vegetable ones for sure. The omelet one. Are you? I'm assuming it has a different name as opposed to the, what was it, nigiri sushi, the ones
Hmm.
where it's a circle wrapped, so it's wrapped in seaweed. Those circular ones. You see those a lot, but I'm not sure what their name type is.
So maki.
Oh, oh, of course it is. It's a maki roll. I do know this. God, you think I don't live in Japan? Hmm.
It's to be fair, it's been a while since you've been to a sushi restaurant, so.
That is True.
If you had the menu in front of you, you'd probably go, "Oh, yeah, that one, that one, that one, that one," which is what you do.
But yeah, apart from those I've just mentioned, coming up blank.
I'm going to give you some sushi names and see. I bet if I mention it, you'll probably know what it is. Inari sushi.
As soon as you said Inari, it just made me think of the Inari Shrine, which is foxes, and I'm assuming it's not fox sushi.
It is not fox sushi, but it is fried tofu pouches or abarage, which kind of look, fox colored, that kind of dark brown color.
Oh, okay, so it is kind of related to foxes.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it is little tofu pouches that have been stuffed with rice, and sometimes they can have rice and vegetables or hijiki, which is a type of seaweed. And oh, they're also slightly sweetened as well. So the pouch itself is kind of cooked in a sweetened liquid. I think it's dashi stock and mirin and sugar and sake. So slightly sweetened, delightful. Like you can get them at the convenience stores. Highly recommend it. Inazushi is like one of my favorites. I'm gonna mispronounce this word, so I'm gonna look it up. Chirashi sushi.
It might be like the previous one. If you describe it, I might recognize it. I just didn't know what it was called.
So, have you ever seen? It's a bowl. First of all, it's served in a bowl or a deepish kind of looking plate. And it might have shrimp. It might have ikura, which are salmon eggs, kind of like the big round little circles. Maybe some cucumbers, some like egg threads. It basically means scattered sushi, and so almost like
Like a
deconstructed.
deconstructed. Ah, we said it at the same time.
Yay, high five. And this is served at more special occasions. Like, for example, in school, during Girls' Day, which is in, was it March 2nd or March 3rd? I can't recall which. This was served. So it's like almost like a celebration sushi. And according to the professor, some older generations think of this when they think of sushi.
Because it's like an older style of sushi that they would have that would have been more common when they were growing up.
I think it's because it's a celebration kind of sushi too. It's like it's for important occasions.
Okay.
So, 'cause I think sushi, let's go ahead and kind of touch on sushi restaurants. So we have, I know in Japan we have different levels of sushi restaurants. And also, by the way, there are links for the types of sushi. So we're just going to mention a couple, but have fun exploring. Anyway, sushi restaurants in Japan, we have different levels. So, like you mentioned, the kaizen sushi or conveyor belt, which is like sushiro. Can you think of any other ones here?
Kapazushi. Used to
Yeah.
go to that a lot when I lived in Morioka.
There's the one with the gotcha gotcha, the game. Do you know that one?
I know the name Gacha Gacha, but I don't know the restaurants you're on about.
Kurazushi.
Ah,
You can play a game with your plates. You get, I think it's 10 plates or is it 5 plates? I think it's, no, it's, I think it's 10 plates. Every 10 plates, you finish your plate of sushi, you put it down the chute, and when you get to 10, you get a chance to win the prize, which is like the little, like little capsule machine. So every 10 plates, you get a
yeah.
chance to win a prize. And you can spend, because of course you have to get that chance, you're going to spend at least, if you're by yourself, at least 1,000 yen, maybe 2,000 yen if you buy more expensive sushi. Two people, you could get easily 3,000 if you're trying to get something and you don't get it.
Hmm.
Not that we've done that. And also hamazushi.
Oh, Hamazushi, the name does ring a bell, yes.
Have you ever eaten at a like a sushi bar, for example, or a higher end sushi restaurant?
Yes, but not in Japan. It was in Malaysia.
Ooh, we'll hear that story for another day. I have not. I've only eaten sushi from the Kaizen sushi and from, oddly enough, the grocery store has fantastic sushi here. So based on, at least I mean I don't know about you. I know you do. We watch different like Japan vloggers. Even before we came to Japan, we watched Japan vloggers because it gives you a really good idea of kind of what things are like in Japan. We've seen people go to nice sushi restaurants, but Thomas, that's something we have to put on our list when we are able to go to Tokyo together again. We need to go to like a place where the sushi chef can give you his osusume or his recommended sushi of the day, where
Yeah.
basically you just
Mm.
put them, put yourself in their hands. Never done that. Really want to. Mildly scared, but am happy to try pretty much
But also
anything.
exciting.
Yeah. I mean, if we go, we're gonna get sake. So, if
Mm.
it's terrible, just take a chug, it'll be all right. So, one of the places I found for some of my research, and I'm gonna mention we're not getting anything from this website, but it's really fascinating. It's called Sushi University. They offer like a course in I think sushi tasting, which sounded really super cool. So my link is in the links. So if you want to check that out, maybe learn a bit more, I definitely recommend that. And you had mentioned about like eating cooked sushi was like the image we have of sushi now is that it's raw, and that if you eat cooked sushi, it's like, oh, is that really sushi? Well, yeah, that's really sushi because sushi has a long history, fermentation, cooked, and really until the refrigeration period didn't really eat a lot of raw fish, or maybe hardly any, or if you wanted to risk it, I guess. So that raw sushi that we eat now, yeah, it's a more modern invention in many ways. And so I think this is a happy little thought. And it's that sushi is sushi. Sushi is now spread worldwide, and sushi has been influenced by different cultures and different areas, and even from like Japanese immigrants who lived in America relied on what was available in America at the time to make different ingredients. That you've seen that with, Chinese food in America as well. They had to rely on what was available to sometimes modify the food that they had brought with them. Not just that, but things like California roll and I think dragon roll. And there's so many different creative names I know in like American sushi restaurants. Well, sushi has its roots in Japan in many ways. It's really a global food. It's pretty much in so many countries. I even encountered in my research a sushi website in Poland. I don't know how I got that in my search history, but I got like a Polish sushi restaurant. And even in Japan, there's like have you seen the hamburger on sushi rice? Like that's
I have seen that. I've never ordered it because I just didn't understand how it was sushi.
I think it's interesting and creative, and I think that probably it's very popular with kids. I feel like perhaps.
Mm,
But if you like it, you enjoy that sushi. You enjoy the sushi however you like. Honestly, it feels like to me sushi has become an almost innovative form of culinary expression. So you do have your more classic sushi, but we don't even eat like I guess what could be considered like the like origins of sushi. We don't eat like the usually don't eat the really fermented fish. I mean, we have some here, but I don't like it. So the professor eats it. I have attempted to eat it, but it's a little bit for me. So I feel like sushi is one of those things that has just become a huge phenomenon. And also, for example, the professor loves American sushi. He thinks it's great. There is a California roll I have seen at Sushiro, and he's the one that gets that. I don't get it. He gets that almost every time, and I love
so
it.
sushi's even come full circle. All foreign evolutions of sushi have circled back to Japan, and you can get them here now also.
Some of them, yeah. And mentioning a note about like the California roll, and I've got to do some further research into this, but the professor told me that the avocado as an ingredient was added by an American, but the decoration technique for that roll itself, because it has like the sometimes like mayonnaise and a beautiful pattern and the little fish eggs on top. He told me that that was actually a Korean influence. Like that decoration actually came sort of from
Interesting.
Korea. So even that roll itself is inspired by so many different places. And I just thought that was quite beautiful. So I feel like there should be like very upbeat, happy music, like powerful trumpets or something blaring in the background. And I'll just say this again that if you eat sushi, if you eat your, just the cup of roll, so cucumber sushi, or if you eat, fried chicken on your sushi, or if you eat sushi from a really nice, expensive sushi restaurant, and I don't know how much you spent, and probably a lot, but you probably had a glorious experience. Enjoy it. And if it's your sushi is cooked, that's totally traditional too. And don't worry and don't, just kind of appreciate the fact that you are eating sushi, that you're eating a food that has a huge, long, and interesting history. And it also allows for different cultures to kind of come together because food really, it's one of those things that expands across like, all cultures, all countries. And you've run into, I know you've read into like many people from Japan or other countries who are super excited to share their food with you and how exciting it is. Like you shared some UK food with me, for example, and I can't wait to take you to the soul food restaurant in Tokyo because it's one of those things that you can bring people in to try and to eat. And a lot of ways, food brings us together. So enjoy your sushi, no matter how you enjoy it. And if you don't like sushi, that's okay too. Go to Sushido, get the pudding. It's totally worth it.
So, is that everything then for today for your sushi?
That is my brief brief history of sushi, kind of lightly detailed, a small nibble that hopefully leaves you hungry for more.
Well, that was really interesting, actually. A lot of things I did not know. And like I keep saying with these culinary history ones you've started taking under your wing, I like that you always do a general overview for these first ones. So then when we come back to, say, curry, rice, and sushi, we'll have a base knowledge for us to then expand upon it next time. So super interesting. Thank you for that today.
You know what's really interesting? The professor didn't know a lot of this either.
Ah, okay.
So I'm actually, yeah, it was fascinating to look into. And I mean, I love culinary history anyway. I grew up watching a lot of science of culinary, culinary science, and lots of cooking shows and reading about it. So for me, it's super fun to do this because I already have that interest and drive to learn more about food, but also the
Hmm,
history of food as well is just a really great way to know more of what you're eating.
it's very true.
So, with that out of the way, what do you have for us today?
So I started playing around with the idea of let's try and find a sushi poem. However, I then stumbled across a Kotozawa, so a Japanese proverb, and we've done a few of those before. And
Hmm.
it kind of jumped out to me, not that in that it linked to sushi, but it kind of linked to the fact that like these last few weeks have felt a bit rocky for the show. Like I've been quite sick, my head's been kind of out of it, and I haven't lost any motivation for the podcast, but I feel that it got put on the sideline for a little bit. So it got a bit messed up in the long run. And I came across this Kotozawa. I think it kind of linked quite nicely to how the feelings I've been having these last few weeks about everything. So if you're ready, I can read you the Japanese.
I am ready, sir.
Raka eda ni kaerazu, hakyo futabi terasazu.
Ooh.
When I read the literal meaning and I looked at the kanji, I could see it. But a lot of these kanji seem to have readings that we're probably not used to.
Hmm. So there's some words that I did not particularly recognize, but it might be because of
Hmm.
the endings on them. Because some of the endings for some words, the stem changes depending, or the stem stays the same, but the ending changes depending on how you're using it. So go ahead and give me the little literal translation. I'm just going to ask for it.
I'll give you a few notes
Okay.
first behind it, because the website I found it on gives a few notes about the pronunciations and the kanji. So the ra in raka is the kanji for otosu, or like to drop, to let fall. But it can
Ah.
also be read as ochi, as in the punchline of a joke, and is also the ra in rakugo, traditional funny
Ah.
storytelling.
Another show.
Hakyo is a compound of yaburu, as in to tear or break, and as well as kagami, mirror. Futatabi means again, once more. Terasu is a verb meaning to shine on or illuminate. And the zu in so terasazu is used as a negative ending, how we would use nai as a negative.
Ah.
So literally, this would mean in Japanese, fallen blossom doesn't return to the branch. A broken mirror cannot be made to shine. And the meaning that is, they also give it. So relating it to proverb in the West, it is something such as what is done, or there's no use crying over spilt milk.
Mm-hmm.
Now you see why that called to me.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. Like the don't cry over spilt milk. I definitely agree with that. But so I'm gonna, and if I get to, because I know sometimes I do have a tendency to try to sometimes put things on the more positive side because there's a lot of negative in the world. We gotta kind of balance it out a little bit.
Yeah, I
You
get
gotta have
that.
it. You said like the broken mirror couldn't be repaired. Well, immediately I thought of something called wabi sabi.
And what is wabi sabi?
Oh, I get to share this with you. Oh, I'm super excited. Oh my God. Okay. It is a Japanese aesthetic. It is to look at the beauty of the things that are broken, imperfect, like the broken dish. Have you ever seen like a broken bowl that has like almost like streaks of gold throughout it? So it is a technique in which it's a technique and an ideal in which things that are broken, you accept that they're broken, but you look at the beauty of them, like the imperfection, that beauty. And for example,
Oh, I know what you're on about. I know it by a different name. I know it as kintsugi.
Oh, that's true.
Mm,
Maybe the actual technique of repairing with the gold, because you take like a broken bowl and you would
yeah.
put like that gold in between the cracks and reseal it. So then you could appreciate this secondary beauty. So you had the original bowl in its perfection, but then you also can appreciate the imperfection of the bowl because it has been
Hmm,
been remade.
that's cool.
So my mind just when you said broken mirror, I'm like, but you know what? You can make that mirror really cool. You can make it a mosaic. You could put it together with gold. So then when you look at yourself in the reflection, you could also see gold. So you'll be sparkling. Because I mean, I also do agree with that philosophy of like, what's happened, and it is what it is. But sometimes when things happen, there is things you can appreciate from what happened as well. Plus, speaking as a side note from something you mentioned at the beginning of what you said, taking a rest is also really important for our health. And to take a rest is not something to feel guilty about or worried about. So, speaking for myself, your health is the most important thing. And
Hmm.
I emphasized, and I know other people emphasize too, that to take care of yourself is the best thing.
Well, I'm glad you like the proverb today. Proverbs are growing on me.
Oh,
Like the more I find them and the more we learn about them. Not that I'm saying I'm bored of poetry. I will of course never say that. The poetry is just as fascinating. But yeah, that is my proverb for today. I have nothing else for you. So I suppose I should talk a bit. I should mention what I will plan for next week's episode. I've had this planned for a while now. And it's been in OneNote. Heather can see it right now, and I will start the notes. But as for next week, I kind of want to do a kind of a different episode in looking at the world's oldest companies.
oh,
Because when I was doing research into this, I came across the world's oldest company is Japanese. But then I also found out that a bit of a spoiler, but not
oh,
too much of a spoiler. So there are, as of when I did the research, there are 67 companies which have existed since before 1300.
whoa,
And 34% of those companies are Japanese companies. So I kind of wanted to look at those companies, give a bit of information about them, what they do, see what I can find out by next week. And yeah, that is my plan. So we'll see what we come up with. It might end up being a bit shorter than the episodes we've been doing of late. It depends how much information there is out there. But I'm kind of excited to see where this episode goes.
I say me too. I'm super excited. I'm glad we're doing this one. This one, you put it in the topic list, and I went, this is intriguing. I would like to know more.
I'm glad. But yeah, that is everything from me today, Heather, unless you have anything else to add.
Everyone, please take care. And we are so, so, so happy to be back again with you this week. And we really hope you have enjoyed the episodes. And just thank you so much for listening and coming every week. And that's all.
I agree. Thank you so much for tuning in next week. And again, thank you for the few new listeners this week as well.
Thank you.
So if you are wanting to check out the show notes, now that my head is back in the game, I will get up to date with all these show notes for you guys. You can find the show notes as well as a slowly growing database on things we find out about Japanese history when we do our research. You can find that over at japanarchivespodcast.com. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Japan Archives. And if you want to follow my personal Instagram, where I just upload pictures when I do get out and explore Japan a little bit, that is Nexus Travels. So NEXUS_travels. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in this week, and we'll speak to you later. Mata ne.
皆さん気をつけて。またね